The anime opens with the Demon King summoning what are said to be the four strongest generals in his demon army. The first is Aladora, the warrior of hell. The second is Silid, the grand mage of storms. The third is Nome, the earth fortress. Lastly, there is a newly appointed general who appears shocked and bewildered by his sudden arrival, Fuchimura, the director of operations, who turns out to be the protagonist of the story. The scene shifts to Uchimura's past. He was once a simple office worker, full of hope and ambition to achieve great success. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. His colleagues were promoted one after another while he remained overlooked and unappreciated. A turning point came when his manager transferred him overseas to a factory still under construction, an infamous location known as a graveyard for failures. Fuchimura moved to the new town with a glimmer of hope. When he reached out to his manager for help, he was met with anger and accusations of wasting company resources. Despite this, Fuchimura refused to give up. Determined to succeed, he poured all his efforts into revitalizing the factory, doing everything himself from organizing to cleaning and more. Over time, his hard work paid off. The workers began to respect and support him, and the factory started to thrive. Just when things were finally improving, an unexpected blow came. His manager decided to transfer him to another factory in a different country. Devastated, Uchimura questioned the purpose of his efforts. One day, while lost in thought on the street, a motorcycle suddenly hit him from behind. In that moment, he found himself transported to the realm of the Demon King. At first, Uchimura believed he had landed in hell. The Demon King welcomed him warmly, calling him by name. Shocked, Uchimura asked how the Demon King knew his name. The Demon King confidently replied, "Of course I know you, I summoned you here." He explained that after reviewing Uchimura's professional history, he was certain Uchimura was the perfect candidate to become the fourth general in his army. But Uchimura, still conflicted, responded that joining the Demon King's army sounded like a descent into the depths of the underworld. However, the Demon King interrupted, assuring him, "I'll provide you with all the benefits and perks you could ask for. You'll have complete freedom to choose anyone you want to work under you, and your salary will match that of top executives in your world." Uchimura was taken aback by the offer, struggling to process what he was hearing. The Demon King added, "If you're not satisfied, I'll send you back to your world." Relieved by the Demon King's respect for his autonomy, Uchimura began to reconsider. The other generals, however, protested. They voiced their disbelief that a weak human like Uchimura could ever become a general in the demon army. Uchimura thought to himself that they were probably right, but the Demon King remained unfazed, declaring, "If all of you object, then we'll put him to the test." Uchimura was stunned. The Demon King explained, "If he passes the test, none of you will have any grounds to object." Mandora, driven by her fascination with the supernatural powers of individuals from another world, decided to test these claims herself. She launched a devastating attack on Uchimura. Before her attack could land, the Demon King intervened, halting her assault. When Mandora demanded an explanation for his interference, he calmly pointed out her tendency to lose control when angered. He directed her attention to Uchimura, who had collapsed from the overwhelming shock of the incident. The onlookers, stunned by the scene, expressed disbelief, noting that Uchimura was nothing more than an ordinary human. The Demon King affirmed this fact, prompting Mandora to question how someone so ordinary could hold the position of one of his generals. Despite her objections, the Demon King stood by his decision, explaining that Uchimura's presence in the army was deliberate. The Demon King acknowledged the internal challenges within his forces, but emphasized that Uchimura's intelligence and strategic thinking were precisely what the army needed. The Demon King revealed that Uchimura's first test would be to secure an agreement with the Minotaur army. This revelation left Uchimura stunned, comparing the challenge to the difficulty of a high-stakes job interview. The Demon King informed Uchimura that he could turn to Mandora for assistance if needed and left him to face the daunting task ahead. Mandora interrupted his thoughts, announcing their arrival at their destination, a massive door, which she identified as the entrance to the Minotaur leader's chamber. As the door creaked open, Uchimura was overwhelmed by fear at the sight of the towering Minotaur leader. The leader's imposing figure made Uchimura doubt whether peaceful negotiation was even possible. Sensing his hesitation, Mandora offered to help, sharing some tips on negotiation. Uchimura felt a brief sense of relief, but it quickly evaporated as her abrasive approach immediately angered the Minotaur leader. Observing the chaos, Uchimura silently concluded that Mandora was ill-suited for diplomacy. After leaving the chamber, Mandora explained that the negotiations had initially been going well but collapsed when the leader outright rejected the proposed conditions. She admitted to multiple failed attempts to negotiate in the past and, in her frustration, blamed the Minotaur leader for being unreasonable. Turning to Uchimura, she declared it was now his turn to handle the negotiations, leaving him speechless and unsure of how to proceed. Standing alone, Uchimura questioned how he could possibly persuade such an intimidating creature. In his uncertainty, a memory surfaced of difficult negotiations he had faced in his previous life. During challenging times, he would retreat to a quiet tavern to clear his mind and find clarity. Recalling how he had always managed to overcome obstacles, he steadied himself, drawing upon his past experiences and resolving to succeed in the negotiations, no matter what lay ahead. The focus shifted to the Demon King, where Mandora provided an update on Uchimura's situation. The Demon King, maintaining his composure, expressed confidence and waited to see how Uchimura's negotiations would unfold. Later, Mandora stumbled upon Uchimura surrounded by piles of trash, rummaging through the mess as requested by the Minotaur leader. Several filled bags sat neatly beside him. She remarked on how quickly he had taken control of the negotiations. The following day, Uchimura entered the Minotaur leader's chamber. Mandora, unable to suppress her curiosity, decided to check on the progress. To her surprise, the room was filled with heaps of the Minotaur leader's trash, but neither Uchimura nor the leader was present. Confused, she speculated that the negotiations might have failed, prompting the leader to leave. At that moment, Uchimura appeared calmly, explaining that the Minotaur leader was with the Demon King finalizing the agreement. Mandora, baffled, demanded to know what had happened. Uchimura revealed that the agreement had been completed the previous day. Stunned, Mandora questioned how he managed to strike a deal with someone so notoriously stubborn in just one day. Uchimura explained to her that she had misunderstood the situation. She believed the Minotaur leader was rejecting the negotiations, but in reality the negotiations were progressing smoothly. The issue, he said, was the negotiation approach. He shared an experience from his past with a client who initially rejected everything but later agreed once trust was established through clear, passionate, and emotionally driven explanations of the terms. Uchimura pointed out that the failure in Mandora's negotiations stemmed from the Minotaur leader not understanding the terms or the purpose of the negotiations. He also highlighted that the straw requested by the leader was an important gesture of goodwill in their culture, as the Minotaurs used straw to accommodate guests, sleeping on it to avoid overcrowding their rooms with furniture. The leader had been frustrated because he couldn't sleep comfortably on the ground. Hearing this, Mandora felt a pang of regret, realizing that the failure had been due to her inability to understand the Minotaur leader. However, the Minotaur leader interrupted, admitting that the fault was mutual. He hadn't understood her negotiation style either and apologized to her. They shook hands, reconciling their differences. The Minotaur leader then expressed gratitude to Uchimura, thanking him for making the agreement possible. At that moment, the Demon King appeared and praised Uchimura's unique talent for identifying unnoticed problems and resolving them effectively. He then formally welcomed Uchimura as a general in his army, declaring that no one could doubt his abilities after the success of this test. He turned to Mandora, who, though reluctant, finally agreed with the decision. The Demon King then asked Uchimura to extend his hand. He presented him with an emblem symbolizing his status as one of the 4 generals. After putting it on, Uchimura was instructed by the Demon King to always act decisively and do what he believed was right, without hesitation. Uchimura felt a deep sense of pride and pledged to fulfill his role with dedication. Mandora, in her usual sharp tone, asked Uchimura to raise his hand. When he seemed confused, she scolded him and explained that this was their way of welcoming new comrades. She then declared that she hadn't fully acknowledged him yet and demanded that he prove himself further by succeeding in more negotiations. The Demon King concluded by stating that the army was still incomplete and had many issues to address. However, with Uchimura leading the way, they would advance and achieve greatness. Standing by the window of his chamber, he reviewed the strategic documents outlining the army's plans and responsibilities that now rested heavily on his shoulders. A former ordinary worker, Uchimura resolved to prove himself and earn the Demon King's trust despite his humble origins. Shaking off the shock, he decided to introduce himself to the other generals whom he had yet to meet. His first stop was General Sid's room. However, Sid's assistant curtly informed him that the general was away and slammed the door before Uchimura could respond. His plans were interrupted when Mandora, one of the Demon King's advisors, appeared with a summons from the Demon King himself. There, the Demon King tasked him with a critical mission, negotiating an alliance with the Ghoul clan. The Demon King explained that while the Ghoul army was as powerful as their own, their relationship had always been tense, marred by mistrust and espionage. Forming an alliance, he emphasized, was crucial to securing dominance. However, the Demon King acknowledged the difficulty of this task, given the clan's history of rejecting such agreements, and expressed unwavering confidence in Uchimura's abilities. Mandora offered to assist, but their collaboration began on a tense note. Before embarking on their mission, Uchimura suggested visiting General None. Mandora, however, expressed frustration, insisting she had other preparations to attend to. After some negotiation, they agreed to divide their responsibilities. At General None's training grounds, Uchimura was awed by the discipline and sheer size of her army. The soldiers drilled with unmatched intensity, and None moved among them, offering praise and corrections. Negotiating with him, she warned, would be daunting. Before Uchimura left, None handed him a strange object that had unsettled her subordinates, asking him to dispose of it. As Uchimura turned to leave, Mandora appeared, visibly irritated. When he questioned her presence, she explained that her preparations were complete, and she had come to check on him. None dismissed Mandora with a disdainful remark, referring to her as that thing. Finally, Uchimura and Mandora arrived at the Ghoul clan's fortress. They were made to wait at the gates for hours, a clear intimidation tactic. Mandora grew increasingly agitated, but Uchimura reassured her that such delays were common in negotiations. Eventually, the Ghoul leader's assistant appeared, apologizing for the delay and granting them entry. Inside, they were led to a grand chamber where the Ghoul leader awaited them. He wasted no time directly addressing the purpose of their visit. To their shock, he declared that he would only agree to an alliance if they delivered the head of their own Demon King. Mandora, furious at the outrageous demand, was on the verge of an outburst, but Uchimura intervened, calmly responding, "Well, think about it. Thank you for your time." He then led Mandora out of the chamber. Outside, Mandora's fury erupted as she ranted about the leader's disrespect and impossible demand. Uchimura, however, remained calm, explaining that the leader had never intended to form an alliance. By making such an outrageous demand, he sought to shift the blame for the failed negotiations onto them. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of the ghoul leader's daughter, Olulu. To their surprise, she pleaded with them to overthrow her father and remove him from his throne. She revealed that the ghoul clan was in financial ruin, with its people struggling to survive. Her father's refusal to adapt or seek alliances had brought them to the brink of collapse. Despite her bold requests, Bishimura admonished her for openly discussing such sensitive matters. He emphasized the importance of discretion, earning Olulu's gratitude for pointing out her mistake. To everyone's astonishment, Olulu then asked Uchimura to marry her and take over as the clan's leader. Mandora was visibly furious, but Uchimura, overwhelmed, promised to think it over. Later, while Mandora and Uchimura discussed their next move at a tavern, inspiration struck Uchimura. He realized that instead of focusing solely on the Ghoul clan, they could unify the neighboring clans, forming a strong alliance that would force the Ghoul leader to the negotiating table. A week later, the Ghoul leader summoned them again, enraged that Uchimura had successfully integrated the neighboring clans into the Demon King's army. Uchimura explained that his actions were meant to strengthen the region as a whole, subtly provoking the leader into losing his composure. At that moment, Olulu entered, revealing that she had facilitated Uchimura's efforts to ensure her father couldn't ignore the alliance's benefits. Tearfully, she reminded her father of his past strength and urged him to embrace change for the clan's future. Reluctantly, the Ghoul leader agreed to consider the alliance. Days later, Mandora informed Uchimura that the leader had officially accepted. However, Uchimura was now swamped with new responsibilities, including selecting a subordinate from the Demon King's army. Mandora suggested he trust his instincts, but Uchimura admitted he had hoped she could be his partner as he trusted her deeply. Embarrassed, Mandora blushed. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Olulu entered, announcing that her father had entrusted her with significant responsibilities within the clan. She thanked Uchimura for helping her grow. She also expressed her willingness to do anything to repay him. To Mandora's dismay, Uchimura asked Olulu to become his partner. Olulu immediately agreed, leaving Mandora visibly jealous. As Mandora declared herself Uchimura's rival, he smiled wryly, reflecting on the progress they had made. Yet he reminded himself that with great gains came even greater risks. Resolving to remain vigilant, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead, ready to serve the Demon King's army. A few days later, Dinas was working in his office when Lulu entered with some good news. She had successfully reached an agreement with the Bear Tribe, securing their support for the Demon Army as long as their conditions were met. Dinas was relieved and pleased by her success. However, Lulu had more to share. She hinted that Dinas was to be rewarded for his hard work. The award ceremony was scheduled soon, and she promised to tell him more after his lunch break. While Dinas was curious about the reward, he doubted it would be something as underwhelming as a pizza party, given the Demon Lord's high regard for him. Just then, Mandra arrived at his office with lunch, as she often did. While Dinas enjoyed her company, he loathed the bland porridge served daily in the Demon Army. Though he understood the logistical challenges of feeding an entire army, he longed for something more flavorful, especially meat. Hearing his complaints, Mandra suggested a solution. They'd go hunting to get fresh meat themselves. Dinas was hesitant, not fond of hunting, but Mandra revealed another reason for their trip. The demi-human tribes had requested help exterminating a magical beast that had been attacking their villages. This beast had already killed several orcs, and though Mandra believed in the strong devour the weak philosophy, she agreed to step in as the creature was too powerful for the orcs to handle alone. As they ventured into the forest, Mandra noticed mushrooms growing under a tree, and deduced that the beast must be nearby, as previous attacks occurred while orcs gathered these mushrooms. They didn't have to wait long. The magical boar appeared almost immediately. Mandra leapt into action, delivering powerful blows to the creature, but her strikes weren't fatal. While Dinas was impressed by her strength, he realized she lacked the killing power to finish the beast quickly. After enduring the boar's attacks and protecting Dinas, Mandra reluctantly used her true power to snap the boar's neck, ensuring its meat remained intact. They dragged the boar back to the orc village, where the villagers expressed their gratitude and admiration for Mandra's feat. Mandra decided to share the meat with the entire village, much to Danis's surprise. However, things took a comedic turn when Mandra attempted to cook the meat herself, using a fireball and producing a lump of charred flesh. Dinas took a bite and immediately regretted it, describing the taste as akin to eating hot tar. Frustrated, he insisted on taking over the cooking. Once he prepared the meat using proper techniques, the result was delicious, impressing Mandra and the villagers. Dinas offered to teach them how to cook properly, emphasizing that culinary advancement was vital for the demon army's development. Though Mandra initially dismissed the need for someone of his rank to teach cooking, she couldn't deny the wisdom in his words. As night fell, Mandra suggested returning to the castle. Dinas, concerned about the dangers of traveling in the dark, was reassured by Mandra's ability to light their path with her magic. Along the way, Dinas suggested improvements for Mandra, like using a weapon and wearing more protective armor in battle. However, Mandra took offense at interpreting his suggestions as an insult to her pride as a demon. She stormed off, leaving Dinas alone in the forest. Forced to seek refuge in the orc village, Dinas spent the night reflecting on what went wrong. The next day, Dinas reported the mission's success to the Demon Lord, but admitted his falling out with Mandra. The Demon Lord, understanding the importance of their partnership, ordered Dinas to reconcile with her. After some research, Dinas learned that demons take immense pride in their physiques, as their magic is tied to their physical forms. By suggesting armor that covered her body, he had unknowingly insulted Mandra's pride. Meanwhile, Mandra confided in Lulu, lamenting that Dinas hated her and didn't appreciate her body. Lulu explained that Dinas, being human, had different cultural values and likely didn't mean to offend her. Realizing her mistake, Mandra grew embarrassed and decided to apologize. The two finally met in the castle stairwell, where they both apologized. Mandra admitted she just wanted Dinas to compliment her, while Dinas reassured her that he did find her attractive but had misunderstood demon customs. They forgave each other, strengthening their bond as partners, though Mandra misinterpreted partner as a marriage proposal. Later, the Demon Lord held a special ceremony to honor Dinas for his achievements. He presented Dinas with a magical stone, a significant and rare reward. However, Dinas, feeling that his success was a team effort, walked up to Mandra, knelt before her, and offered to share the honor with her. Unbeknownst to him, presenting a magical stone in this way was a public marriage proposal in demon culture. Mandra was too embarrassed to accept immediately, but the gesture left everyone stunned and excited, marking the end of this chapter in their journey. Subscribe to see what happens next. Our new anime begins with our protagonist, An, standing at the edge of a cliff.
The story begins in a medieval fantasy world, where Rio is seen lying on the wooden floor of a lonely, empty cottage. The cottage is completely barren, with only 2 books and a knife resting on a table. Without paying much attention to these items, Rio steps outside to get some fresh air. Surrounded by towering mountains and the serenity of nature, he breathes deeply and decides to try something instinctual. He raises his hand and chants, "Water, come forth!" And to his surprise, a small sphere of water materializes in his palm before splashing to the ground. A few days earlier, Rio had found himself floating in a vast white void, utterly confused and disoriented. There, he was greeted by an angelic figure who assured him that this wasn't the afterlife. The angel, seemingly capable of reading his thoughts, confessed how lonely it had been without visitors for years. Calmly processing the situation, Rio learned that he had died, hit by a truck in his former world. Surprisingly collected, Rio accepted the news and assumed he was about to be reincarnated. In his mind, he dubbed the angel Michael and asked what kind of life awaited him next. Michael told him he was free to live however he desired. Rio, who had always yearned for a peaceful, uneventful life, received Michael's blessing and prepared himself to be reborn in a magical world called Fee. Before sending him off, Michael provided a few key details about this new world. Only 20% of its population could use magic, and Rio was among the lucky few. He possessed a natural affinity for water magic, which aligned perfectly with his slow life dreams. Michael then transported him to the forest of Rondo and set him up in a small cottage equipped with 2 months' worth of food stored in an ice house. The 2 books inside the cottage contained essential information about the world and a beginner's guide to magic. After reading them thoroughly, Rio finally succeeded in conjuring a small body of water. To ensure his initial safety, Michael even cast a magical barrier around the cottage to keep forest monsters at bay. Rio dedicated himself to practicing water magic and soon discovered he didn't need to speak incantations aloud, just visualizing the spell worked. With this newfound power, he filled a wooden bathtub with fresh water. Though thrilled, he was also slightly disturbed by the idea that this water came from within himself. The water was freezing cold, so he attempted to heat it using the ancient fire-starting method of rubbing sticks together. After repeated failures, he tried applying his high school chemistry knowledge. By separating hydrogen from oxygen in the water, he accidentally turned it into ice instead. But then, thinking creatively, he used the ice as a magnifying lens to focus sunlight and spark a fire, unlocking warm water at last. With a sense of accomplishment, he enjoyed a relaxing hot bath. Later, while sitting down for dinner, Rio realized he'd eventually run out of food and would have to hunt. However, the idea of venturing into the monster-infested forest was terrifying, especially since the only weapon left for him was a single knife. Knowing he needed to learn offensive magic, he began practicing. His first attack spell, Water Ball, was a disappointment. It caused no damage. Determined, he refined it by concentrating the water into a narrow, high-pressure stream, much like a water arrow. After many attempts, he created a basic water jet spell, though it still lacked real impact. So, Rio shifted to ice magic. He managed to create tiny ice crystals, but projecting them was a new challenge. Ice proved far more difficult to control than water. Days of trial and error followed, and though he eventually learned to instantly create crystals, Weaponizing them remained difficult. With time running out and food dwindling, Rio improvised by shaping the ice crystals into spearheads. Then, armed with basic magic and handmade tools, he ventured into the forest to forage. By a riverbank, he found quartz, which he could use to start a fire if he ever ran out of mana. While collecting herbs, he suddenly faced his first real danger, a lesser boar monster. It charged at him, and Rio froze in fear. But the adrenaline rush and the fear of dying a second time jolted him into action. He cast ice magic to make the ground slippery, causing the boar to lose its footing. Seizing the moment, he summoned multiple icicles and skewered the beast. Though victorious, the encounter humbled him. According to the monster compendium, lesser boars were among the weakest enemies. If he'd nearly died to one, then the peaceful life he had imagined might be a far cry from reality. Back in his cottage, Rio continued to study the compendium. One entry warned that if he ever encountered a dragon, he should run, even though that probably wouldn't save him. Worse still was a creature called a kuna. If you ever saw it, the only thing to do was pray. Running wouldn't help. Yet, these warnings didn't deter Rio. The next day, he went out again, this time finding a tree bearing fruit. He took a bite and finally experienced a small moment of joy. But that peace was short-lived. Out of nowhere, an assassin hawk attacked, knocking him to the ground. It was faster, stronger, and used invisible air magic. Rio tried to flee, but running from a bird was futile. Cornered, he quickly used ice magic to trap the hawk. Thinking it was dead, he approached. But the hawk broke free. Injured but still alive, it flew off, while Rio collapsed in exhaustion and frustration. Trying to find his way home, Rio became lost in the forest and stumbled upon something terrifying. A Dullahan, a headless knight with smoke pouring from its neck, calmly tending to its horse. Somehow, Rio survived and made it back home. Over the following weeks, he trained relentlessly. He fought monsters, improved his fishing, and honed his ice magic until it was powerful enough to cut through solid rock. Yet each night, he returned to face the Dullahan again and again, not to win, but to grow. The compendium had no entry about this mysterious knight, making Rio wonder if it was even a monster. After one particularly intense encounter, the Dullahan handed him an ice sword, then vanished without a trace. Things settled down for a while, until the assassin hawk returned. This time evolved. It was larger, darker, and far more powerful. Rio's 5-layer ice barrier shattered instantly under its assault. Even his 10-layer defense was no match. His most advanced attack spell, the Ice Lancer, failed as well. In desperation, he reached for his walking stick, only to drop it. His fingers closed instead around the ice sword the Dullahan had given him. With that weapon, he struck. The hawk retreated momentarily, then lunged again. This time, Rio's strike was true, and the hawk fell. As it lay dying, Rio recognized the hawk's determination. It had evolved purely to challenge him, just as he had grown stronger because of it. Respecting his fallen opponent, Rio ended its suffering with solemnity. But the journey wasn't over. Soon after, a dragon approached, one that could speak. To Rio's amazement, the dragon was surprised that someone could hear its voice again. When the dragon asked about the fallen hawk, Rio explained he had killed it and showed him the ice sword. The dragon immediately recognized it as the Fairy King's blade and asked Rio what he had done to earn such a gift. Rio, puzzled, said he didn't know. The two conversed until sundown. Before parting, the dragon introduced himself as Luent. Meanwhile, back in the celestial realm, the angel Michael was once again checking the reincarnation slab. That's when he noticed something he had overlooked. Rio possessed a hidden trait that his previous soul didn't have, the power of eternal youth. What did this mean for Rio? How would he use this gift in the future? As these questions lingered in the air, far away by a quiet riverbank, a mysterious red-haired boy was seen lying unconscious in the sand. Who is he? What role will he play? The story is just beginning. The anime begins in Japan, with an orphan boy named Kazuya, who was on his way to a convenience store to get a meal for himself when he saw a thug about to attack two girls. Without hesitation, he jumped in to save them, and in the process, he got stabbed by the thug and died. At least, before his final breath, he was happy knowing he saved the two girls behind him. With that, he opened his eyes in a whole new world as a 3-year-old boy named Kane. Naturally, Kane freaked out upon seeing himself as a completely different person, but his mother, Sylvia, thought it was a normal reaction since Kane had been unconscious for a week. That was why she and others left to bring some soup for him. Left alone for a moment, Kane was able to piece together the situation, that he had been reincarnated after saving those girls. While checking himself out in disbelief, Sylvia returned and, misinterpreting the situation, thought Kane needed a nappy change. After that, he got many answers from